Thank you very much, Amy, and thank you to all of you for coming down this evening. As Amy said, my name is Angus Wyatt. My pronouns are he, him, and his, for anyone who'd like to know. For the past 6.5 years, I worked at Channel 4 in the advertising and sales team, and I was also the chair of Channel 4's Pride network for Pride, inventive. Don't worry, I haven't been fired or anything. I used to work there. I just recently left for an exciting new opportunity, but as you'd all been so kind as to buy your tickets for this evening, we decided we'd press ahead anyway with my insight and knowledge from the 6 years I was there. So we're going to be looking this evening at LGBT plus representation in TV and particularly in advertising, and what Channel 4 are doing to drive change and improve inclusion and diversity both on and off screen. Now, whilst I'd expect most people attending a talk entitled LGBT plus representation in the media to know what LGBT plus means, an important part of being inclusive is to not make any assumptions. So for those that don't know, LGBT plus stands for lesbian, gay, bi or bisexual, trans or transgender, and then plus, which covers the immense and colourful spectrum of sexual identity, including questioning, queer, intersex, asexual, pansexual, and everything in between. But LGBT plus is much easier to say, which is probably just as well as I'll be saying it a few times this evening. So I want to start off with a little bit of audience participation, which is where you all sort of shuffle in your seats and you're all glad you didn't sit on the front row, but I will come to you. It won't be like this all evening, just one example. So, who can remember the first time they saw a same-sex relationship on TV? Think about the year, the show, you might remember who you were with, where you were. Hands up, who can remember the first time they saw same-sex relationship?
It's probably Buffy.
Yeah.
Not the original time round, when we watched it when I was young.
Cool. Anyone else? Brookside. Great. Yeah. Hollyoaks or EastEnders. Yeah. Will and Grace. Coronation. Yeah. Few in there. Now, same question. Who can remember the first time they saw a heterosexual or straight relationship on TV? What's that? Beginning of time. That's I haven't tipped you off on this. It's not how this works. That's already shown the importance of representation. It's easier to remember the first time you saw a same-sex relationship on television because we see fewer same-sex relationships on TV, and because to those of us who grew up looking for role models, looking for people who felt the way that we did, television often provides those role models in a way that real life didn't. And the representation of LGBT plus characters, stories, and lives on screen are also important for non-LGBT people too, because they can be used to educate and inform people and to normalise LGBT plus lives for those who might not meet LGBT plus people in their everyday lives. So for all of us, regardless of sexuality or gender identity, representation is important. And tonight we'll be exploring the extent and manner in which LGBT people are represented in television and advertising. Remember the first time. But before we delve into specific examples of LGBT plus representation, it might be useful to understand some of the background issues and where we've come over the last decade. Last year, the website Men's Pharmacy looked at the top 20 popular worldwide TV shows of each year between 2008 and 2018, according to IMDb, to explore LGBT representation in TV. In the past 10 years, there have been 153 LGBT lead characters across 95 of the 220 most popular shows. The rise in the number of recognisable LGBT roles compared to previous decades has been driven in part by the increase in the breadth and availability of content. We once viewed 3, 4, 5 main channels, depending on when you were born, mixed audience, all showing mainly British programming. So our experience of diversity on our screens, as many of you have already identified, was reliant mainly on soap operas like Brookside, Hollyoaks, EastEnders, who by and large did a reasonable job of trying to challenge societal norms, or reality shows who often didn't and relied on normally stereotypical characters for entertainment. However, our viewing now is increasingly dominated by American shows on platforms like Netflix and Amazon. And with that, our eyes and minds have been opened to a whole raft of new and diverse talent, characters and storylines. Orange is the New Black, Modern Family, and How to Get Away with Murder are not only award-winning, hugely popular major US productions, but they also all feature LGBT plus characters in lead or key roles, and often in situations where their sexuality is ancillary to the storyline rather than the focus of it. However, of those 153 LGBT characters in the research, 76% of them were played by non-LGBT actors, which raises the issue of authenticity. In research conducted by Channel 4 and YouGov, which I'll discuss later on, many LGBT plus focus group contributors suggested that the majority of LGBT characters they saw on TV were either stereotypes, such as camp men or butch women, or tokenistic, so a gay kiss for the sake of it with no grounding in the narrative, neither of which were recognised as authentic. Whilst casting directors should of course cast on merit, giving the roles to the best actors, too often they're casting for commercial audiences. For example, Scarlett Johansson is likely to be a bigger box office draw than a lesser known trans actor, but the trans actor would deliver a much more authentic performance grounded in real life experience. But herein lies part of the problem. We want LGBT plus stories to be recognised and given prominence, often meaning box office acclaim or awards or rating successes. But that often comes with them being led by non-LGBT actors. And we also want authenticity and to see more LGBT plus actors on screen. I don't pretend to have the answer on how we achieve telling authentic stories to mass audiences and hitting both those points, but I suspect part of the answer lies behind the camera, not in front of it. So bringing this back to my specific experience and what Channel 4 is doing to drive LGBT plus representation on our screens, and thinking about why what goes on off screen, such as internal policies for employees, can impact what audiences see. Channel 4 was set up by an Act of Parliament in the 1980s with a distinct remit to celebrate cultural diversity, promote alternative views, stimulate debate, and inspire change. From Brookside, Queer as Folk and Hollyoaks, to Cucumber, Genderquake and Drag SOS, Channel 4 has always operated on challenging prejudices and perceptions and normalising LGBT plus life on screen. In 2015, Channel 4 launched their 360 Diversity Charter, putting a commitment to diversity at the heart of everything at Channel 4, on and off screen, so that the organisation, what they do and who they are, truly reflects the diversity of Britain today. The Charter set out 30 activities that the broadcaster would take to improve diversity and inclusion, both on and off screen and at all levels of the business, including the top 10 key changes that they thought would make the biggest differences, such as in-house employee diversity targets and monitoring, and diversity guidelines for our programme commissioners. In creating the Charter, Channel 4 recognised that diversity of backgrounds, diversity of thought, amongst decision makers and creators off-screen are an important part of shifting diversity on-screen. In order to measure, track, and try to improve the internal diversity, Channel 4 asked staff to share all their diversity information, including sexual orientation and gender identity, which is, of course, not mandatory for them to complete that if they don't want to. Whilst diversity targets can be seen as a gateway to box ticking, meaning some companies avoid setting targets altogether, they can also be a useful tool in benchmarking against national averages, tracking improvements, and keeping diversity inclusion top of mind for hiring managers. Without requesting diversity data from employees, it's very difficult for a company to know whether they have a diversity problem or not. So as part of the 360 Diversity Charter in 2015, Channel 4 set themselves a target of having 7% of staff identifying as LGBT+ by 2020. This was benchmarked against an estimated non-heterosexual population in the UK of around 6%. As of December 2018, which was the last time the stats were collated, the percentage of Channel 4 staff identifying as LGBT+ stood at 7.3%. Channel 4's diversity data is regularly reviewed by the head of talent, the head of diversity and inclusion, and the chief HR officer. If any of these figures appear low, then they'll review the way that we market vacancies and identify how to ensure the most diverse possible pool of applicants for future vacancies, including where those vacancies are advertised and how we can better reach out to minority groups. The crucial thing in this is that this is not about positive discrimination. Channel 4 still interviews and selects the best candidates for the job, but it's about ensuring that they're fishing in the widest possible pool from the widest selection of candidates. In other words, if you only ever post your jobs on the Guardian's job site, you will only ever attract the same sort of candidates for your vacancies, most likely young, white, metropolitan university educated ones. But if you open up that process and ensure your vacancies are visible and clearly promoted on a wider range of sites, like Stonewall's Proud Employers or My G-Work, then you're more likely to attract a more diverse set of candidates. By improving diversity at the advertising stage, you increase the likelihood of improving diversity at the interview stage and hopefully through to recruitment as well. And it's not just internally where Channel 4 track and monitor their diversity data. They are also part of Project Diamond, an online system used by the BBC, ITV, Channel 4 and Sky to obtain consistent diversity data on the programmes they commission. And Channel 4's commitment to diversity and inclusion also extends to helping their partners and suppliers too, such as programme producers, helping them to become more confident in inclusion and diversity. For example, in 2018, Channel 4 launched a guide for the whole TV sector on employing disabled talent to provide indies and other partners with a one-stop shop on the business case through to the practicalities. And in 2019, they published a white paper providing 14 insights into inclusion and diversity based on their own learnings for others to follow. So all of this information is useful for understanding the diversity of an organisation. But what about inclusion? Do LGBT staff feel the same way as other staff? Are they treated the same? Do they have the same lived experience whilst they're working there? To ensure inclusion through equality, Channel 4 reviews its pay grades, salary awards and staff satisfaction survey data against its diversity data. Any potential concerns are then discussed with the relevant head of department to ensure consistency and fairness across all teams. In a clear symbol of its commitment to transparency around diversity and inclusion, in November, Channel 4 published for the first time ever its Lgbt Pay Gap data, alongside similar data for gender, BAME and disability. Channel 4 currently has an Lgbt pay gap of 17.7%. Now this is primarily driven by a lower level of representation of out LGBT people among more senior top earning employees. However, as this is the first year of reporting in this way, and Lgbt pay gap reporting is not currently a legal requirement, Channel 4 are already working to improve the data moving forwards to try and get ahead before it does become a legal requirement, and starting that with their new inclusion and diversity strategy. Last year, 4 years on from the launch of the 360 Diversity Charter, Channel 4 set out new major commitments to inclusion and diversity within the organisation, on screen and across the industry. Channel 4's vision is to build on their heritage in this space, to be a trailblazer on diversity, with an emphasis on achieving greater inclusion, to be a beacon to the UK industry of what an inclusive, diverse and creative culture can look like, and to give Channel 4 a creative and competitive edge. The three main pillars to this new inclusion and diversity strategy focus on an inclusive workforce, so instilling a culture where the power of the diverse workforce is celebrated and people recognise that diversity of thought can lead to greater, richer ideas and commercial gain. Secondly, inclusion on screen, so shifting the focus to authentic portrayal and representation, allowing audiences to recognise themselves on screen. And finally, leading the industry, becoming a driving force and pioneering in the industry on inclusion and diversity. There's already evidence that the 360 Diversity Charter and the new inclusion strategy are delivering results for Channel 4. Since 2015, they've been awarded the EY National Equality Standard and named Britain's Best Diverse Company. And only last month, or a few weeks ago, they rose 112 places to enter Stonewall's index of the top 100 LGBT inclusive workplaces for the first time ever at 35th in the ranking. A major part of promoting diversity and inclusion internally in many organisations, not just media ones, is staff networks. In 2015, I helped set up For Pride, Channel 4's LGBT+ network. It was designed to inform, inspire, educate, influence and drive positive change for LGBT people both internal at Channel 4 and external to the business. For Pride is open to all staff, regardless of sexuality, gender or gender identity, and it has more than 120 members and allies across the organisation, representing 16% of all Channel 4 employees. The network and its activities are regularly and visibly promoted to all staff through internal comms, digital adverts, desk drops, regular staff emails, including those from their executive sponsor, the Chief Executive, Alex Mahon. As well as working towards creating meaningful and lasting change internally at Channel 4, such as securing the introduction of gender-neutral toilets, trans allies training and a transitioning at work policy, For Pride also hosts more than 15 events per year, including film screenings, panel discussions on topics such as homophobia in sport or faith and sexuality, and staff networking events too, which allow all staff to come together to celebrate diversity and inclusion and discuss LGBT issues and topics. For Pride also organises Channel 4's participation in Pride parades in London, Manchester and hopefully soon Leeds. And they don't just operate for the benefit of Channel 4 staff. As part of their support of the wider LGBT+ community, For Pride supports multiple charities and groups. Over the past 3 years, they've raised over £2,500 for several charities, including Mermaids, the LGBT Foundation, and the Terence Higgins Trust, as well as gifting airtime worth more than £250,000 to Pride in London and £50,000 to Stonewall. For Pride is also an integral part of Intermedia, a network of media owners, LGBT networks, including Channel 4, Sky, ITV, BBC, The Telegraph, Endemol Shine, and many, many more. The purpose of Intermedia is to drive LGBT plus diversity and inclusion across the media industry, to share best practice with one another, and to pool resources to help provide representation and inclusive activities for smaller media organisations. Last May, For Pride was named the Best Employee Network Group at the 2019 British LGBT Awards. Now, I appreciate I've just talked a lot about Channel 4's internal policies and strategies, which unless you work in HR, and you might be, might not be the most exciting or glamorous thing. But it's these policies and strategies that provide the foundation for what happens on screen. So whilst it may be a little bit dull, it's a vital part of improving the representation of LGBT plus stories and characters, and making LGBT plus people across the country feel seen, valid, and valued. But onto the creative side of things. At the start of this talk, we discussed a few of our own first experiences of seeing LGBT plus people on screen. And many of these are amongst TV's first such examples. In 1989, EastEnders gave us the first gay kiss in a British soap. But it wasn't until 1994 that we saw the first female same-sex kiss, pre-Watershed, in Channel 4's Brookside. Then in 1998, Coronation Street delivered the soap's first trans character in Hayley Cropper, played by cisgender Julia Hessenhauer. But again, it wasn't until 2015 that we got the first regular trans character played by a trans actor, Annie Wallace, in Hollyoaks. There have been countless other firsts over the years: the first male rape storyline, Luke Morgan in Hollyoaks, the first trans winner of a major reality show, Nadia Almada in Big Brother in 2004, the first major soap character diagnosed as HIV positive, again, Hollyoaks in 2015. But representing diversity in television is now less about firsts and more about bests. The best, most authentic portrayals of LGBT plus characters and storylines are the ones that stand out to us most now, such as ITV's Butterfly, which beautifully and painfully portrayed a young person with gender dysphoria and their family and the struggles that they went through. Or Channel 4's The Bisexual, which gave a mainstream voice to bisexuality in a way we've rarely seen before. Even the less serious stuff can still make serious points. The relationship of Sol and Robert in Netflix's Grace and Frankie showed audiences that people can come out as LGBT plus later in life, perhaps even once they've been married or had kids. A storyline which perhaps helps some people to better understand and accept Philip Schofield's own coming out just over a week ago in similar circumstances. In 2018, Ofcom conducted a review into representation and portrayal in BBC television, which worked with data and polling company Kantar to conduct focus groups with people from diverse backgrounds and experiences. The groups felt that TV today is better at representing and portraying a wider mix of people than it used to be. Whilst historically some groups were marginalised on TV, people feel that the situation has improved and things are changing for the better. However, some people raise concerns about being presented in one-dimensional, inauthentic, or stereotypical ways. The portrayal of transgender experiences was felt to focus on the negative and the medical, whilst lesbian, gay, and bisexual people said TV often gives a skewed impression of them and their experiences. Even within LGBT audiences, people felt that LGBT representation and portrayal was skewed towards men, with less representation of women and very limited representation of trans people. Analysis of those instances where the sexuality of the person on screen is in some way portrayed supports this view. It found that there were approximately 5 times more appearances by gay or bisexual men than lesbian or bisexual women across the survey. The government's own LGBT action plan, which looks to improve the lives of LGBT plus people in the UK, also singles out media representation and stereotyping as an area for improvement. The Government Equalities Office has now set about working with the media and schools to challenge harmful gender stereotypes and is developing the evidence on the cause and impact of gender norms. But content creators should be wary of shoehorning diverse characters into the storylines just to boost representation levels. The Ofcom review found that people reacted strongly against such box ticking and felt that simply introducing wider representation is not enough to ensure authentic portrayal. and in welcome support of my earlier section on internal policies and diversity targets, the focus group recognised that authenticity is not just about who we see on screen. They recognise that it can be influenced by who is behind the scenes as well. Some respondents said that they could sense when those creating the content did not come from the same background as the characters we were seeing. A workforce that doesn't reflect the UK's diversity presents a challenge to authentic portrayal of the full range of people across the country. Now, the average UK adult watches approximately 3 hours of television a day, which seems like a lot. You might think that's too much, too little. Everyone will have their own, but that's the average. With most channels and catch-up platforms showing between 10 and 15 minutes of advertising per hour of programming, that means, on average, we're subjected to roughly half an hour, or a little bit more, of TV advertising per day. Quick maths. But that advertising, therefore, makes up so much of our viewing time. Improving LGBT+ representation in advertising is also an important part of improving overall representation of diversity on our screens. Normalising LGBT+ stories in adverts, seeing LGBT+ individuals engaging with a product or a service, helps to demonstrate equality. And given that we're at the Museum of Brands in LGBT History Month, I suspect the representation of LGBT people in advertising might be of interest to some of you. Building on their work to promote diversity in their programmes, Channel 4 wanted to improve on-screen diversity between shows. So in 2016, they launched the Diversity in Advertising Award, an annual award offering £1 million of airtime to an advertiser which puts diversity and inclusion at the heart of an advertising campaign. The first year of the award focused on people with physical disabilities and was won by Maltesers, whose game-changing campaign launched around the 2016 Rio Paralympics. The theme for the second year was hidden disabilities and mental health, and was won by Lloyds Bank, who encouraged staff and customers to get talking and get the inside out. In 2018, the Royal Air Force were chosen as the winners, with their tongue-in-cheek advert portraying women in the RAF, with voiceovers from stereotypical female-targeted ads overlaid. Against the backdrop of the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall riots, it was decided that the 2019 Diversity in Advertising Award would seek to tackle the lack of representation and the stereotyping of the LGBT+ community in advertising. The award challenges brands and creative agencies to develop a campaign which puts people from the LGBT+ community at the heart of their advertising, but without being tokenistic. In establishing the theme of the award, Channel 4 commissioned research from YouGov, exploring the levels of representation and inclusion in TV advertising today. In a multi-layered approach, YouGov coded 1,000 TV adverts from 2 typical months in 2018, before carrying out quantitative and qualitative studies looking at the perceptions of the total population in comparison to specific minority groups, primarily BAME, LGBT+, and people living with a disability. The research found that whilst on a superficial level, it looks like steps have been taken to include more minority groups in TV ads, there's still a long way to go to be truly representative. The research discovered that LGBT+ people hardly appear in adverts at all and can be stereotyped or portrayed negatively. People from the LGBT+ community feature in just 3% of the adverts in the survey, despite making up around 6% of the UK population. What's worse is they took a lead role in less than 1% of those adverts. Among the focus groups, many LGBT+ people felt that the adverts relied on same-sex couples, with particularly little thought given to bisexuals, gender fluid, and trans people. Many of the LGBT+ focus group felt advertisers fell foul of resorting to common stereotypes, portraying lesbians as butch, gay men as camp, or showing gay characters in a party scene. I mean, I love a party, but it's not all the time. 60% of the 2,000 adults surveyed felt the LGBT+ community, when it did appear in adverts, were often represented in a negative way, usually in supporting or tokenistic roles. In fact, tokenism came out as the most strongly recognised issue with the biggest blind spot when it comes to the perception of the population, with LGBT+ individuals twice as likely to have seen their representation as tokenistic than the total population, citing their common inclusion as background characters in montage-style adverts as a clear box-ticking exercise. The research findings identified that despite the amount of lip service paid to the hot topic of diversity, there is a long way to go for true positive representation in adverts, and Channel 4 say it is their responsibility to push their advertising clients and agencies for this. In September, following a detailed pitch process, judged by leading figures from the advertising industry and LGBT plus community, including the IPA, Marketing Society, and Stonewall, and yours truly. Channel 4 named Starbucks as the winner of this year's Diversity in Advertising Award. Their winning entry celebrates the life-changing moment facing some trans and gender-diverse people as they use their new name in public and overcome the challenges and despair of repeated dead naming. It is inspired by real-life experiences of individuals who find Starbucks stores to be a safe space, where their new name is accepted and where they are recognised for who they are. A feeling which is supported by research which shows that consistently using the correct name and pronouns for trans people can reduce their rates of anxiety, depression and suicidal thoughts to the same levels as that of their cisgender counterparts. The hashtag What's Your Name advert depicts James, who's transitioning but faces everyday challenges because he does not identify with his birth name, Gemma. It culminates with him trying out his true name for the first time at a Starbucks store by asking to have the name James written on a Starbucks cup, which is then called out by the barista. The advert launched on Channel 4 just over 2 weeks ago, and for those who haven't seen it, I will play it, but we have a little technical, it's where I get very, very technical with it all.
It's James.
James?
Bear with. Thinking about it. Seamless. This was a defining moment for Starbucks, as it's the first time they've created a piece of film for broadcast specifically for a UK TV audience. It also marks more than 5 years since Starbucks advertised on television in the UK. This helps give the ad even more prominence from an already well-known brand. Simply acknowledging the existence of trans people in a television advert will help many people to feel less isolated and understand that they are valued. And that is amplified by this coming from Starbucks, who are also unashamedly supporting the campaign across social media and in all of their stores. That's right, this is not just a tokenistic display as part of a £1 million competition. They've also created a mermaid tail cookie, which is on sale in all of its stores, and which raises 50p per cookie sold to support the charity Mermaids. The funds raised through the What's Your Name campaign will allow mermaids to make a meaningful change to their helpline services, which support young, gender diverse and trans people and their families who are so desperately in need of access to information and reassurance. The adverts also received positive reactions from across the media and the LGBT plus community, including from Lucy Clark, the world's first trans football referee, who hailed Starbucks as being spot on with their adverts and recalled her own experience of using her new name to order coffee for the first time. Elsewhere, the advert has been labelled as groundbreaking, powerful and emotional by the likes of Attitude Magazine, Pink News and The Independent. In addition to the £1 million airtime prize for the winner, Channel 4 will also match fund runner-up campaigns with commercial advertising airtime worth £250,000. So any of the shortlisted brands who go on to make the advert that they pitched will be eligible for £250,000 of airtime. So let's hope they and other brands follow Starbucks' lead. We've come a long way in the representation of LGBT plus people in television and advertising, but many challenges remain. Programme makers and decision takers don't always get things right, and I can attest to that. And LGBT plus characters and stories are still too often tokenistic and inauthentic. We must improve diversity off-screen in order to increase both representation and authenticity on screen. Whilst television can be a force for good, we cannot expect it to continue doing the heavy lifting to change hearts and minds and shift perceptions of the LGBT+ community. If we want the children and teenagers of today to grow up with the role models and allies they so desperately need, and that we needed when we were growing up, then improving LGBT+ representation isn't just a matter for television or advertising, it's a matter for all of us. We need to be those visible, positive allies and role models, wherever we are and whoever we're with. Pat Waders, head of HR at LinkedIn, puts it, when we listen and celebrate what is both common and different, we become wiser, more inclusive, and better. So let's listen more. Let's celebrate our differences as well as our similarities. Let's promote tolerance and inclusion. Be the representation that we need, and be the role models that we needed when we were younger. Next time you're in Starbucks, buy a mermaid cookie. Thanks very much.